we bring people from all over, right, down to our offerings in Peru, and to offer them these modalities, these plants, these medicines, these species that are not a product of Western culture. And so, in acts of responsibility, not rescuing, there's a big difference between rescue and responsibility, big difference. In an act of responsibility and solidarity with the indigenous populations of those lands, the original bearers of those traditions, in order to continue pouring into their cup of cultural continuity to keep their communities alive in this modern world, we choose to work only with indigenous tradition bearers and people who are indigenous to the lands and to the cultures and to the traditions.
Marc John Brown, welcome to the Accidental Gods podcast. How are you and where are you this grey January morning?
Thank you. How am I? I'm good. I feel settled. I feel fairly solid. Yeah, I feel ready for this conversation. And I'm here in Alexandria, right next to Loch Lomond, ancestral homelands of the McGregors and also of Robert the Bruce.
Yes.
But beautiful lands, yeah.
Now I have deep Scotland envy. I grew up in Eaglesome, which is just south of Glasgow, but we spent a lot of our time on Skye. So we travelled up that road, up the side of the loch, very, very often. And it's such a beautiful place. So thank you for giving me a taste of home. I can smell the loch water and the mountains and the bracken. It's great. So I met you at the south edge of Loch Law, actually, last
Correct.
September, I think. I seem to be booking up 6 months in advance. We are currently booked into October, which is insane. However, what struck me at the time was your groundedness and your humility and your obvious big-hearted connection to the more than human life that came through in everything that you did. You embody that, which for me is what we need to do as a culture, is to get to a point where everybody is that rather than performatively cosplaying that, which some people do, or simply not knowing that we need to get there. And
Right.
in the context of that, you have a Substack, which I will link in the show notes. And towards the end of your most recent post, you say, I don't know exactly what a re-indigenized world looks like, but I know its foundation. Consciousness that honors nature as kin. Relationships that heal cross-cultural trauma and recover cosmological wisdom. Technology in service of connection, not extraction. Modern systems infused with ancestral wisdom. This is the work. Not blueprints for cities, but the shift in seeing that makes those blueprints possible. And this is absolutely the foundation of this podcast and where I have recently got to in my understanding of the world. And you were obviously there way ahead of me. So my core question is, how did you get to that understanding? And where does it take us? And how do we bring that into scale in time? Those are big questions. So pick any of those questions that appeals to you and let's run with it.
Yeah, really, really big questions. And hey, you're saying like I'm obviously ahead of you. I'd reel that back and say, if I'm here with you, we're mirroring each other, right? You're seeing yourself in me, and yeah, and I really feel, I mean, even more so as I kind of contemplate the magnitude of the questions you just asked me. I can't be anything but truly humbled, and I think that the moment it all really, because I knew, we say that we hear this all the time, that knowledge becomes wisdom when it moves from the head to the heart or from the head to the body, right? We hear this, it's cliche, we hear it everywhere. We need to become embodied. And what what does that actually mean? What is the bridge between knowing and embodying? Well, I would say that is exposure and life experience, lived experience, right? I think that's the bridge. And there's no other way about it. There's no other shortcut. You have to live it to be it, right? Or to become it. And so that moment that where I really, it just like it locked into place for me. It's also featured in another essay that I wrote on my Substack prior to the one you just quoted from. It was a time of initiation down in the Amazon jungle. I was in my what we call a connection ceremony, where I was being connected. And the reason I love James Cameron and Avatar is because of this precisely, because it gives us such a visual representation of what plant spirit connection truly is, right? And this, so if we can use Avatar as a reference point to help people to conceptualize what went on in this connection ceremony, essentially what my maestro was helping me to connect those hair follicles with, with Awa, or with those flying dragon things that they fly around, and I can't remember their names, forgive me. That's essentially what was happening. I was being connected and merged with the plant spirits that I was set to work with more extensively and apprentice with, and have work through me in my, ceremonial healing work, if that's what you want to call it. And I think the thing that made it happen was, and it was a moment of absolute terror, where I struggled to hold my center point, but I found it through breath, and that was when a plant spirit was brought to life and channeled through my body. In a very, well, just a very real way. It's what happened. It came up through the earth and through my coccyx area, all the way up through my spine, and out of my crown. And of course, in that moment, it was like I was absolutely terrified when it first happened. Found my center, remembered my maestro, my master healer teacher, his words, of don't, when they come to connect, just, find your place of calm. It's normal. So tuning into all of that, tuning into my breath, I found my place of center and just allowed this connection to happen. And I think the bridge, I think the where the coin truly dropped, if you will, was realizing that my maestro, my master healer teacher, had brought that into existence by singing it into being, by singing it into existence, right? That's where like the coin dropped. It was like, of course, this is it. This is Indigenous consciousness.
Right. That you
That's it.
can sing this into being, that you know
Right.
how, and you can create the song, and the song works with the plant spirits, and then you feel the impact of it.
Yes. And reality is birthed, right?
Right.
Reality
Yes.
is
Yes.
created through
Right.
song,
Yeah.
or through thinking, or through praying, or through whatever medium it may be,
Yeah.
to channel that vibration of intention and visualization. Oof,
Yeah.
you know? And in terms of bringing it into marriage with our current systems, again, I don't know what it looks like, but what I know is that the relationship needs to be established or re-established. It runs through our DNA. It exists within our ancestral memory,
Yep.
and it just has to be reawoken, as it was reawoken in that ceremony for me, right?
Yeah.
There is a ethnobotanist. I think is she an yeah, she's an ethnobotanist. I can't remember her name. Maria Fadiman. Have you heard of Maria Fadiman?
I haven't, but we'll look it up. I'll
Yeah,
find her name.
PhD ethnobotany, Maria Fadiman. She says something, and I think I also quoted her in one of my previous essays, or maybe in the book. I've quoted her somewhere. She says we cannot care for that which we do not have a relationship with.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yes.
So the relationship needs to be, and I wouldn't even say established, it's re-established. I wouldn't even say awoken, it's re-awoken, because it
Yeah.
exists.
Yes.
It's there in our DNA. It's there
Yeah.
in our ancestral memory. Once we can truly reawaken and reestablish that relationship, that's the foundation.
Right.
From there, I don't know.
But we don't have to know, do we?
Exactly.
Then we ask the
Yeah.
plants, or we ask the web of
Right.
life, whichever part we connect to.
Right.
Okay, and this resonates so much with so many things. Let me have a think. So, John Young says that by the age of 12, the average Indigenous youngster that he encounters, even now, has made meaningful relationships with over 400 other species. Whereas in our culture, we probably made a meaningful relationship with our screens by the age of 12 at this point. And there are
Right.
people working very hard to ensure that we've gone beyond the attention economy to the affection economy, where they are now trying to program everything so that it captures people's hearts, not just their minds. And yet, the web of life is alive and vibrant and working through us. It seems to me that if everybody has to go through what you went through to get that connection, 8 billion people would require at least a billion maestros, probably, and that's maybe not going to happen. And I know you
Right.
teach things, we both teach things, and I'm wondering, this is probably leaping ahead, but one of my core questions for this year is how do we help people to do the inner work so that they can connect to the web of life authentically in a way that's free flowing so that they can ask, what do you want of me, and respond to the answers in real time? How do we get that at scale in time? And
Yeah.
and I wonder what your experience is of, you teach people, and is it that you have to sing into being a plant spirit through each of them for the penny to drop? Or are there ways that we in
Mm.
the West can do the work to do the healing, to reverse what in some of us might be 12,000 years of separation from the web of life? What are the pathways? Is it always that we just need to have someone who knows how to sing something through us?
Mm. To decolonize our consciousness, right? To
Yeah,
decolonize
yeah.
our way of being. um, I mean, the short answer is no. You know, there are many mediums, and I mean, um, the way that we take this work to people, of course, is through work with plant spirits and connection to plant spirits. And we always say to people, um, you know, even if you're skeptical in the face of the idea that this plant has consciousness and knows and understands you as a person, as a being, and may also know what your needs are and also how to have those needs met, even if that seems so foreign and there's a lot of resistance towards that, all we request, all we invite you to explore is being open to it being a possibility. Just even if just for the duration of this ceremony, 1 hour, you know, right? Even if it's just for this next hour, be open to it, you know. Um, and then of course there's shamanic drumming, and you know, you can literally be in a tower block in New York and be connecting to an animal spirit, right, with the power of a drum. Um, and there are, you know, I mean, like it's there's growing research obviously around like our circadian rhythm and like optimal time to connect with screens versus, you know, nature. You know, the optimal mm, combination of these, when to do which during the day. Um, and I really believe that this whole, you know, this whole movement of like, you know, when you first wake up in the morning, before you open your laptop screen, before you open your laptop and look at its screen, go barefoot, stand in the grass, just allow yourself to be regulated by, you know, the energy of nature. If we could just add one more little ingredient into there, that is exactly what I've just said. Be open to the idea, even if just for that 15 little minutes that you are allowing your feet to be, you know, uh, touched by the grass, you know, even if just for that little 15 minutes, you open yourself to the possibility that the earth beneath you knows you intimately, understands you, understands your needs, and knows how to have them met. Do it. Ask the question. Ask what you want to
Yes.
ask.
What have you got to
Right?
lose?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then if after those 15 minutes you want to
You want to
close
go
back
back
up
to,
and just
yeah.
get on with life, then go do it. But at least have that little window where you're just
Yeah.
opening yourself. And I think, 8 billion people on the planet, it's a big job. It's a
It's a big
big job.
job. But my feeling is the more people who honor your invitation and do that, you suspend disbelief for a very short amount of time, and you ask for what you need rather than what you want, what your soul needs, what your spirit needs, what your true self needs, and at the point when the flow of the world begins to respond to that, your ability to suspend disbelief expands a little bit and expands and expands until you have a point where a spirit arises through you and your world is different after. And
Right. And if we can touch just one person with that, or two people,
exactly.
or three
Then it
people,
ripples out, doesn't it? I think the energy
right.
of my sense when I met you in real life and even now talking to you over Zoom is I can feel that groundedness in you.
Mm.
And so people, even if they're not aware that that's what they're looking for, will feel that around you. And so my sense, Gurdjieff said a century ago that it only took 80 fully enlightened human beings to transform the planet. He didn't spell out what fully enlightened meant. And he lived in a world where there was, 500 million people. But even so, I think we don't have to reach all 8 billion. I feel, and I'm checking whether you feel, there's going to be a
Yeah.
critical mass. I don't know what that critical mass is, but it's probably not huge. To
Hmm.
create an energetic shift. Does that settle with you?
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Thank you for reflecting that knowledge back to me. It's something that I don't just think. Of course, yes, I feel, but I feel it's a knowing.
Hmm.
I know this. I know this to be true. And um there was a lady a number of years ago. You're just bringing her to my memory now. Keisha Crowder. She was bringing Native American teachings to the world a couple of decades ago, I think, or maybe like 15 years ago. And she said something along these lines, that really, really stuck with me. We only need like 1/3 of any given population to shift in
Hmm.
consciousness and vibration for it to then
To
ripple out.
ripple everywhere.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
interesting. I've been listening to Pam Gregory, and she connects with someone who I don't fully understand what's going on. But anyway, they're speaking as if the Archangel Raphael is speaking through them, and that being said, if 1/3 of the population would bless their water, their drinking water, the showering water, all of the water, then your whole species would shift. And I guess there's also a suspension of disbelief that is required to really honor the water. It's a similar concept, and it's really interesting that independently they've each said 1/3. I was thinking closer
yeah.
to 10%, but if it's 30%, let's go with it. So let's take a step back a little bit because you sound to me as if you grew up pretty close to Glasgow, and yet um, and yet you're working with a maestro and experiencing plant spirits coming through you, which is not the usual experience of the people that I met when I lived in Glasgow. So how did you come to be the person who's writing the Substack that you wrote and leading the courses that you write and having the experiences that you have?
Ah, are you ready for this one? My goodness. We were talking before we, began like recording, and you said again. I'm going to paraphrase, but you said something about asking somebody to speak about something, and then just opening. Your question was just being a key where they just open up and tell a very long story, and this might be one of those moments.
That's fine. You're the one who
Yeah,
has to go pick up your kids. That's the time limit, so go for it.
cool. So actually, I'm from Edinburgh. I'm from the west of
That morning
Edinburgh
side.
originally. Yeah. Well, the West is. I'm
A
originally
different
from
beast.
a council estate environment called Broomhouse. I don't know if you know Broomhouse. Um,
I'm Glasgow, sorry. Anyway,
pretty rough part of Edinburgh. And then my mum, bless her, really bless this decision that she made in the mission to protect me, from, I guess, the rigors and the dangers of growing up in that environment. She chose to move me to the center of the city, to Haymarket.
right.
You may be
Which I do
familiar
know.
with, yeah,
It's beautiful.
yeah,
Cobbled
yeah,
streets and old shops, and it's gorgeous.
right, yeah. So we moved to there, and we lived I lived 10 years of my life there. And in that time, uh, you can take. They say you can take the tiger from the jungle, but you can't take the tiger or the jaguar from the jungle, but you can't take the jungle from the jaguar. The same kind of social patterns, the same intergenerational trauma patterns continue to live out. And my childhood was really not easy, not pleasant, not nice. Um, but I guess what you could consider to be like my saving grace in that time, from 11 years old, two families of South American uh, immigrants, one Argentinian, one Paraguayan. Um, and of course, the Paraguayan guy, because it's so proud as well, the Paraguayan would always tell me about how his country has two constitutionally recognized, languages, Spanish and the indigenous tongue of Guarani. So that was like the first little, and he spoke Guarani. He taught me Guarani words, right? Haupe, mate copio, right? He taught me these words. Ipora hande. um,
Oh, the
so it's,
translation of the transcript's going to struggle with those.
uh,
Never mind.
well,
Carry on.
have some fun with that. But um, that was where like the first seed was planted, right? And I'm like, by the time I met the Paraguayan, it was 2 years after I met the Argentinian. So I would have been 13 by that time. By the time I was 15, there were few people in the English speaking world that would recognize that I wasn't a native Spanish speaker when hearing me speak Spanish. And there were only a handful of people in the Spanish speaking world that could immediately tell that I wasn't a native speaker, right? So it's pretty much completely bilingual by age 15. Um, I went on to university in Stirling, like I think 18, something like that, to do Spanish and Latin American studies. But this insatiable drive to get out of the corner of the classroom that I was sitting and studying all this stuff in books and just to go and live, you know, I couldn't contain it. And so I left uni after only about 4 months, worked for 6 months to save up money, and then went to live in Argentina.
Right.
Um,
When
yes.
was this? Was this relative to when the Falklands War? Was it before or after?
No, after. It was,
Right.
yeah, definitely after. So this was the year
Oh, long after.
2008. Yeah, yeah. 2008. Yeah. And of course, you're mentioning that when I went to Argentina, I mean, there are still, even today, 2026, there are still signs that you can drive along motorways in Argentina, and there are just road signs with like spray paint or with, you know, whatever they're using to uh, produce their letters, saying Las Malvinas son Argentinas, the Falklands are Argentinian. He just brought me that memory. Um, so I lived in Argentina for like 6, 7 months. In that space of time, I met a woman who just blew my mind up, and she's a clairvoyant. She literally looked into my eyes and told me she was able to see like 6 lives past and 6 lives into the future. And she said, "You're going to get married really young." Bear in mind, at the time, I'm what, 19 years old? Yeah. She says, "I can see you're going to get married 20, 21, 22. Don't see it going past 22. I can see that's kind of the age bracket. Between 20 and 22, you're going to get married. And the woman that you marry, she's going to be of a very indigenous race, a very indigenous, she's going to be of an indigenous community. And because I can see, this is what she said, because I can see that you feel much more attracted and much more affinity with, the indigenous populations." And I was like, okay. This is all kind of news to me, 19 years old, like living in Argentina by this point, 4 months. That sent me off on an absolute spree. I emptied the bookshelves of multiple bookshops in Buenos Aires, then learning about past life regression, learning about the journey of the soul. This was my spiritual awakening. And it kind of, it I wouldn't say it forced me, but it definitely inspired me, catapulted me into, canceling my flights home, taking to the streets, selling all of my designer gear on the streets, like Diesel t-shirts, Armani jeans, all this stuff, all the stuff that I had, my little diamond earrings that I used to wear back then,
You
uh,
were such a different person.
totally, totally different. Sold it all. Sold it all. Some people back then on that street of Buenos Aires got serious bargains. Made a little bit of extra cash, bought myself a smaller, I think I sold a 100-liter Osprey backpack and bought like a little 40-liter backpack. And then I hitchhiked all the way through Chile and Bolivia into Peru. As I was hitchhiking through Bolivia, the scene is completely different. The population is like really high percentage still indigenous to the land. And hitchhiking as a concept doesn't really exist because it actually, it's a lot more common in Europe and in what would we call them, Europeanized countries like Argentina and Chile. When I got into Bolivia, colonized, right? Yeah, there we go, colonized. As a concept, hitchhiking isn't really a thing. So what I found myself doing was traveling in the back of construction trucks that were offering subsidized travel fees to the indigenous populations to travel village to village to do commerce with their crops, their animals, and I was in the back of trucks with tractor tires and chests of drawers and goats and chickens, and that's where I came face to face for the first time with that world. And so the meeting point of my spiritual awakening and my study of past lives, the journey of the soul and whatnot, coming face to face with these people, with this way of being, was the collision of realities that made my entire life what it is. And 5 days after getting into Peru, I met the woman who 2 weeks later I would move in with, 3 months later I would marry, and 17 years down the line, here we are still today, after we're 17 years married. In June. We're 17 years together in March, 17 years married by June. I got married on my 20th birthday.
Right. Gosh. So the
Yeah.
woman was right that you've
Yes.
spoken to. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And here
Fantastic.
we are 17 years down the line. So that is how it all came to be. My wife is of an indigenous community, of an indigenous population that is still living, still alive, still practices with their traditions. And from there, we've traveled South Korea, China, Malaysia, all around Europe, all around South America, always looking to connect with earth-centric traditions and see how we can be in reciprocity with each other and learn from each other. So that is how we got to
Wow.
where we are today.
And that's a brilliant edited highlight. Thank you.
Yeah.
And this could be a jumping off point for a lot of different things. But one of the things that's leaping up for me, just before we started recording, we were talking about how do we live within the death cult of predatory capitalism and survive, and yet help to dismantle it from the inside. And I'm wondering, as you were traveling in the back of the trucks and you're beginning to meet indigenous people whose culture, I'm guessing, is still more or less intact. Francis Weller talks about initiation cultures versus trauma cultures. And our culture is the trauma culture, which is separate. It's the trauma, the original, the core. What Vanessa Andreotti's grandfather said, the core wounding is the belief in separability. And that we have that sense that we are separate, and we promote that within our culture. But that initiation cultures, in Francis Weller's terms, have intermittent, episodic, contained encounters with death, and the containment is held by the people and the more than human world. And who, and it's all through life, it's not just the adolescent initiation, but that at these periods, the individual reconnects with the web of life to ask for the help to step through, and then becomes freshly aware of that reciprocal relationship with the web. And that sits very badly with capitalism, where we have that traumatic rupture. And we were talking about how is it that we can exist within capitalism and hold that sense or keep the flow with the web. And I wonder, how did the people that you were meeting, because they were traveling in the back of a truck for commerce, they were having to interact with the death cult in its nastiest form because it doesn't like Indigenous people. And yet they were, I assume, keeping a version of their culture intact. How does that work?
Ah, as I listened to you speak, I had this image appear in my mind, and I think I was, it's just the epitome. Like this image that popped into my mind, and it's a memory, right? And did I carry, I don't anymore, but did I carry a little bit of guilt around that for a bit? I probably did. Um, but I think what roared loudest in my being for sure after this exchange that I'm about to tell you about was intrigue. And all these questions that you're asking me in this conversation that we're having right now is like, this is it. So the moment that the image of which popped into my mind was, I was in the back of a truck with a whole bunch of um Aymara and Quechua people from Bolivia. And there was some tremendous views, like right at the top of the Andes Mountains, way up high. I don't know, don't ask me what altitude we were at, but up there were these mirages, right? Or like just bodies of water that, like, I could barely tell where the water ended on the horizon and the sky began. It was like, almost blurred, but I could see these flamingos as well in the water. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, I think this might be the nicest image I have ever fathomed live. And I thought, I need to get a photo of this. And so I asked one of the guys on the in the back of the lorry, can you take like, here's my camera, can you take a photo of me with that? And he was like, no, no, you know, like, what? Why? Like, I'm not going to do anything with it. Like, I, like, like, what do you think I'm going to do with it? And he showed like he was skeptical, that he didn't trust what I was going to do with the photo, or what I was going to do with him having handled my camera. But actually, I learned when I did manage to convince him to take the photo, I learned it was just because he didn't have any experience of this world, and this. And like, he took the camera, and he was like, I remember he had his tongue hanging out the side of his mouth, like,
Trying to work out how
like
to make it
trying
work.
to work out
Right,
how to make this thing work.
right,
Like,
right. And
you know,
five-year-olds in our culture just going click, click, click. But
right,
but then
right.
five-year-olds in their culture doing stuff that we could not fathom. So yeah.
Absolutely. Like, that was the epitome, you know, for me, of everything you've just asked. Um, and at the same time, it's like, you know, I'm cold. I've got cold feet. I've got cold hands. I need to make a fire. Can you help me? I'll I'll bet you with every
Yeah.
penny
The
I've got,
fire would
like,
be there. Yes.
boom, in a very
Yes.
short space of time, he would have a fire made.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess, I guess, and my experience of this threshold point of existence and point of encounter is fairly extensive at this point. And what I see is there is a level of a serious and a seriously concerning level of contamination, cultural contamination that happens when the indigenous populations who don't really have any experience of working with market-based economics, monetary systems, their value systems, the concept of value is so
Right.
far
Yeah.
from what is known as valuable in this predatory capitalism that you have so beautifully expressed. And that there is a point where money infiltrates just that little bit too much, and then the culture and the consciousness becomes contaminated, and greed begins to be seeded. I've
Right.
seen it
Yeah.
so many times, so many times. And it is that exact thing, that exact phenomenon right there is perhaps my and my wife's biggest struggle in life, because we collaborate, have intimate relationships, work with 5 different indigenous communities in Peru, and that might grow as
You said you were
our
thinking of moving
projects
back,
expand.
so then it will grow.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And it's like they are being forced into this world. They have no choice. They have no
Mm.
choice, or they're left with
Left with very
yeah
little choice. Yeah.
very little choice, right? Um, and we are stewarding that threshold point. We are like, maybe not stewarding it, but we're at that threshold. We're sharing that threshold with them and doing our best. Well, doing our best to help guide it and orient it in ways, that are conducive to keeping the cultural values, um, I guess, strong,
Mm.
alive, without it being
Yes.
necessarily swallowed by
So interesting.
this thing, this
Yes.
monoculture, because that's exactly what's trying to
Yeah.
happen here, is that the entire population of Earth, you know, something out there, some consciousness, some power out there wants to swallow it all up to become one
Yes.
monoculture, you
Yes.
know?
Yes. Various people have called it the Moloch or the Egregor or whatever we call it. I remember talking to Alner Lada, and he recounted the story in North America of the Wetico or the Wendigo, and it sounds, the way he describes it, it was a kind of boogeyman that they would occasionally mention to kind of frighten the kids with a bit. Although I guess I think frightening kids is probably a very Western thing to do. But anyway, it was a very rare thing, and it would be maybe a band of hunters got caught in the snow, and maybe the survivors had to resort to cannibalism, and then they came back and everybody recognized that they'd got this virus thing, they got this thing, entity in them, and there were really complex, long, detailed ceremonies to help heal this person, to remove this entity that had got into them so that they could return into the people, because otherwise it was contagious. And then the white people arrive on the shores and they've got an entire culture that's Wetiko. And they
Mm,
and how do you deal with that? It was one person in a tribe of
mm,
150. You can handle it. When it's hundreds of people storming off a ship and they just don't care about anything that lives, what do you do? And so what I'm hearing from you, which in a way feels really exciting, is that you're trying to modulate the infection rate of the Wetiko so that they can interact with the death cult in a way that isn't deathly. And I'm wondering how that works, and I'm wondering if the plants help to modulate that, because my belief, my projection, my hope is that the web of life is a hyper complex system that knows where it needs to go, and that if we can connect with it in the way that you connected with the plant, we will be guided, and that everything that is happening in the world isn't irretrievable. It's just that we need to shift quite fast to something that is in service to life instead of in service to pain and death and the commodification of suffering. And so you're right there, that interface, at the leading edge of how do we do this? Because in the same, I'm feeling, and I'm thinking this out loud, but the image that I'm getting is, up until now, the Wetiko has swamped anything that it's come to. The Egregor just eats everything. But if you can create a space where indigeneity filters the other way, then it is my belief that no human being really wants to be part of the death cult. We were not born to pay bills and then die. At a core level, we know this, but that's all it offers us. You're on the hamster wheel until you're useless, and then we'll throw you away. And offered a different way of being, I think anyone and everyone would take it if they could see how. And what you may be doing, and I'm asking this, is perhaps offering a way for a kind of antidote to the Wetiko to filter back into the death cult. Is that a thing, or am I just making that up?
Maybe, maybe. And hey, this is why I knew that before coming into this conversation, like I was ready, because these were the exchanges that I was having. It was like, this concept of professionalism, right? The concept of professionalism is a product of the Western way of being, right?
Yes.
What is it to be professional?
Ruthless and
Right,
avaricious and prepared to do whatever it takes to get to the top of the pile. Yes.
right, right. And in this particular context, the exchange that I was having was around, like, details of contractual obligations, right? Get this. Right before our call, I promise you, like in the half an hour before our call, like this
Yeah.
interview, this exchange was happening, and that's why I'm saying, I can't remember if I said it before we hit record
You
or
did before we hit record, so
after.
it's worth saying again for the people who haven't heard. Say we were due to record 5 days ago, and you were not well.
Yeah,
And it sounded to me like you were also not well this morning, and you were thinking, "No, I can't do this." And then you had this exchange, and by the end of it, you thought, "Yes, I
correct.
can do this." So, but tell us
Yes,
about the exchange.
exactly. Yeah, that is well contextualized. Thank you for. I couldn't have done it as well as you just did. So,
Good.
um, yeah. Thank you for providing the context. And um, we have dear friends on this path who are collaborators and who provide us space to be able to do our work. And there was like some level of misunderstanding that was happening around like everybody's responsibilities, right? And we're in 2026 now, right? And like the original kind of correspondence in text form came in like 2023, and then there was like a modified version of it in 2024. And of course, like from the Western professional like perspective, it is my duty and my responsibility as a professional, right? In an act of professionalism, it is my responsibility to remember those like contractual right. If we're thinking from that place, if we
That's
choose to think
your
from
side
that
of the
place, right?
contract is that you know the contract. Yes.
Right, exactly, right.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
we choose to think from that perspective, in that mindset, you know and so this was the exchange that we were having, like, okay, boof, okay, if we're thinking in this way, then yeah, that is my responsibility, like. And what, if there was any ambiguity in the middle of like this as to who's responsible for what, that ambiguity, from this perspective, thinking with this mindset, may be said to be down to my oversight. Cool. I can own that. And I do. I own it. Um, but then there's a conversation to be had beyond that, and perhaps even more important, that this way of interacting with each other literally forces people to be and exist and express themselves and vibrate in a very certain way, right? it forces, and so I brought the question. I was like, well, you know, we bring indigenous elders from the Amazon jungle, from the Andes Mountains, and we are, I guess in many ways, their bridge. We're the bridge between modern, inhabitants of the Western world, Western societies, and these ancient worlds from the jungle and from the mountains. And if we weren't there, then how right would it be that we try to hold, for example, the indigenous elder coming fresh out of his village with no understanding of Western market-based economic paradigm or dynamics? How right would it be that we want to hold that elder accountable to this contract that we have set up between ourselves, when the consciousness that created the paradigm within which this contract is valid is so far from where these people are and how they understand the world around them, and what if, yeah, okay, what if that little bit of oversight, professional oversight on my part, might have come down to, what in Western medical terminology may be considered neurodivergence, or, simply not being good at these, at
Yeah.
these,
Spreadsheet's
ways
not
of
your
being.
thing. Yeah.
Right, right.
I,
Like,
I can resonate with that. Spreadsheet's not my thing either. Yep. Yeah.
so, and that was the conversation that was happening immediately before this interview.
Right.
And I thought,
Right.
wow, perfect
Interesting.
segue for this interview.
Yes, and I'm wondering how it landed without, we can't obviously name people or get too close, but this is the interface between who we need to be and who we are just now. And my belief is that we have to make this transition peacefully, because power over is part of the old paradigm. We cannot begin to do this. Violent revolution, first of all, we'd lose, and second, it's not the answer. Violent revolution always leads to another hierarchy and power over. It's not the way forward. And so, how peacefully do we move to the edges of the existing system such that there's a stepping off point to emerge into a new reality? Because in systems thinking, you can't see the new system from the old system. If you can, it's not a new system. You're just painting the wheels on the bus a different color. So we can't see what we're going to emerge into, but I think we can quite readily see the edges that we need to get to emerge into a new system that's worth having. And you're there, you're at that edge. And how do you, so I'm feeling in my own physicality a kind of like a corkscrew, except it's going clockwise, of that incompatibility and trying to navigate, and I don't want to twist in that. I don't want to twist like that. I want there to be a flow and a kind of up and outness, almost like you described with the plant. And I wonder, how do you have those conversations? Because the bottom line, somebody somewhere has to pay bills, presumably, and that's what they're worried about. It all comes down to the fear. If, in my view, capitalism is the commodification of suffering, and the bottom line of everybody's tensions around it is the fear of lack and of loss and of abject poverty. And there's a good reason why they didn't like the idea that we could put homeless people in hotels during COVID, because suddenly there weren't homeless people on the streets and everybody didn't have that as their terrorizing baseline. And so it's everybody, or not everybody, but the people who are worried, they have an inner part that is defending themselves quite fiercely against that level of lack. And so how do we help them to step into a different space? How did you help them, or did you help them to step into a different space?
Well, I think it's an ongoing conversation, both on a macro level and within that particular relationship. One thing that I can be very grateful for is that these particular people, these particular collaborators, should I say, I'm certain, I feel blessed to be surrounded by people with whom I'm collaborating and with whom I'm also, friends, that are ready. to do
Okay.
this level of work, you know,
Right.
where like it's our professional relationships, if you will,
Right.
they're almost like a playground, like a dojo for
Mm.
refinement of, you know, the way of relating. And it truly is. I'm blessed. I'm grateful. I'm truly grateful for this. And I know that this is it's an ongoing dialogue, you know, it's absolutely an ongoing dialogue. And the number one thing at the center of all of it is power, you
Mm.
know. Where does the power lie? And how does everybody take responsibility for their own power? And um, you know, is how do we cater to our own power and nurture our own power? Because power is not a bad thing inherently, you know, not a bad thing inherently, right? Power is
Yep.
magnificent when used ethically, right?
Yes. Power with,
Um,
but not power over, in the old
correct,
60s phrasing.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So where do we uh, nurture the power in the space, in the collective, between ourselves, whilst nurturing our own power and thus our own sovereignty, without needing to be in this dynamic of power
Mm.
over, of I'm right, you're wrong, no, you said
No,
this,
no,
I said
absolutely.
that. You know, there's this like tug of war of power that wants to happen, that is purely a product of the colonized mind,
Yeah.
of the ego mind, you know. And I really, you know, it's moving beyond that into just a recognition of the energies, you know, just a recognition of the energies that are at play, honoring those energies that are at play, and using it as a sacred theater to learn and to grow and to enrich in ourselves, so that together we can collectively grow and
Yes.
evolve, right?
Wow. Yes. That sounds so alive and full of potential. And imagine scaling that up. Imagine if that was at Davos this last week. We're recording this at the end of the week of Davos, 2 days after Marc Carney gave what I think will be one of the defining speeches of our era. And yet, imagine if that relationship with power had been possible in that space. Because what I'm feeling, or let me check that. It feels to me that what you're bringing in is rooted in your connection with the land and with the aspects of the more than human world that you work with. Because in the end, it has to, I would say, it's not just about our power and our sovereignty, it's about our commitment to being in service to life, leading who we are and where we are, so that it doesn't just become about, I have this space and you have that space. It is that we are part of a larger whole. And I'm remembering, this is something that's very big for me at the moment, is Dick Schwartz of Internal Family Systems has recently written a book with Thomas Hubel called Releasing Our Burdens. And they are, within both of their systems, identifying how much of the trauma that we carry is ancestral. And in our culture, certainly in the Western white culture, could easily go back 12,000 years, because you can't do our form of dominance agriculture until or unless you believe yourself to be separate from the web of life. And that's that's a lot of generations to be handing down that core belief in separability as our trauma. So what happens when we soften into that? What happens, Thomas Hubel says that trauma is a moment frozen in time. And we've carried that moment frozen in time for 10,000 generations. What happens when we thaw it? And what happens to people around us? And what happens to our capacity to engage with each other, all parts of ourselves, each other, ourselves in the web of life, and yet still pay the bills? Because it must come, I guess. And again, I'm thinking out loud, that's why I'm taking so much of your time, that there's must come a point where paying the bills is no longer what we're here to do. And we don't want to end up in a cardboard box under a bridge somewhere. So how do we get to that? Have you got any insight, instinct, forward feeling? Did the lady you met in Argentina explain the details to you? Perhaps that would be jolly useful. Of how do we let this ripple out to a point where capitalism just cannot any longer sustain its own contradictions?
Yeah. Yeah, well, first and foremost, again, listening to you speak brings images and memories into my mind's eye. And in that exact exchange before this conversation that I was having, I did actually mention, like, we are literally at the threshold here. We are at the frontier, at the forefront of collaboratively building this new world, and what that is requiring. The image of Jesus Christ carrying the cross on his back comes into my mind. It's like, and rather than it being a big, massive, wooden, heavy cross, the weight that we are carrying is the energy of all the generational traumas that have come before us. And this is the work that we are actively doing right now in these exchanges, to lay that cross to rest, to compost it, to birth something new. We're holding this line of sovereignty, true sovereignty, true, healthy, prosperous sovereignty. And at the same time, it's bloody hard. And sometimes I just want to go and hide under my duvet and pretend it's not happening.
You can play with the kids and just lock everything else out. Yeah.
Hug my kids and watch movies. Yeah,
Yes.
totally. And so, yeah, I think, I can only speak. I don't have a clear answer to the question that you asked me, but what I can speak to is what we have in our felt sense is right. And it's our way of working with the indigenous populations that we work with, where we continuously provide. I mean, how many psychedelic conferences around the world have we knocked the doors off to, bring indigenous elders in? One thing I didn't say to you earlier is that age 22, I did actually qualify as a language interpreter. So yeah, and in today, in today's life and in today's world, the way that expresses itself is I'm sitting shoulder to shoulder with indigenous elders, interpreting their language, interpreting their words into rooms of, Western people and people who have come from the Western mindset. And it really is an interpretation, because it's not just language, it's cosmology, So, and translating cosmology is a whole other task in and of itself. But, to continue in answering your question, our way is to continue to give space for the voices of the living indigenous populations to exist. And that includes in our ceremonial healing containers, in all that we do, really. We've done events online, we've been in online conferences where we're bringing the indigenous elders in, and rather than us telling their story, allowing them to tell their story with their own voice, right? This is our work. This is how we do it. And it's profit share and it's revenue share, right? We share our revenue and we share our profit depending on the specific project or whatever the requirements of the project or offering may be, dependent. Sometimes it's just easier to go, this is the revenue, have your half, we'll have our half, and you deal with your costs and we deal with our costs. And then there are other, projects and moments and offerings where it's easier to, like, for us to just deal with everything and then split the profits,
Right, yes. We'll take the
yeah.
costs and then we'll just, whatever's left, we'll share it. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Have your cost cover, have our cost cover, then split the profits down the middle. That is pretty much our expression of a solution in the interim. I know that there's a lot more to do beyond this,
but this is the way it's.
Yeah. And that's what we constantly, embody. So when we're going down to Peru, I mean, even just in December there, last month, we held my wife went down and she held a women's retreat in Peru whilst I stayed home with the kids. Yeah. And, we, because for the first time in a long time, actually, she was going alone to facilitate our work without me, there were gaps that I would normally be filling. So I was leaving gaps because my role was not, I was not fulfilling my role other than staying back and looking after the children, and sometimes being on video calls with people who needed to understand what was going on in, medicine spaces and whatnot. So we had to meet with, several different people to help fill those gaps that my absence was leaving. And in that process, we came face to face with multiple people, um, and quite a solid percentage of those people offering their services into our retreat space were not native to the lands. They were not native tradition bearers, and um, we chose, in line with our ethics, we chose only to work with tradition bearers and people that are indigenous to the lands, right? Um, and that's not to say that anybody else is wrong or is not doing things right or whatever, but in our you know ethical standing, that is what feels right to us, is to continue. We are bringing people from the USA, Canada, Australia, Belgium, Denmark, right? We bring people from all over, right, down to our offerings in Peru, and to offer them these modalities, these plants, these medicines, these spaces that are not a product of Western culture. And so, in acts of responsibility, not rescuing, there's a big difference between rescue and responsibility, big difference. In an act of responsibility and solidarity with the indigenous populations of those lands, the original bearers of those traditions, in order to continue pouring into their cup of cultural continuity to keep their communities alive in this modern world, we choose to work only with indigenous tradition bearers and people who are indigenous to the lands and to the cultures and to the traditions. So, I know that was a bit long-winded, but
No, it was really interesting, and it opened up a whole new set of questions, but I'm aware of the time.
right.
Also, just to let everyone know, the sound like a buzzsaw that's happening is actually my cat snoring.
Oh,
So I
really?
apologize for that happening over the top of anything that
Wow.
I say. The previous noise was the puppy digging holes in the floor, but she's wandered off. Um, we have a little bit of time left.
Yeah.
Responsibility rather than rescue, I think I understand. But there was something in there. Cultural continuity. So in your piece that I originally read out at the top, relationships, you said this is part of re-indigenization, re-indigenizing the world. And so even that is a question. Re-indigenizing feels to me that potentially, and I meet a lot of people because I wrote the Boudica books, people want me to talk about how we were 2,000 years ago when our indigenous culture was still alive. And first of all, we can't know because it was 2,000 years ago and we have it filtered through the Romans, and however much dreaming we do, it's really hard to verify. And second is, my feeling is we have to step forward into something that takes the best of who we are now, that there are some, we can't keep shaming people for being human. We have to give them a way of stepping forward into being proud of being human. And some of that will involve something that you said also, technologies that heal rather than, and connect rather than extract. How do you see us stepping forward into a 21st century indigeneity that works? I'm guessing it will have local flavors, but there must be, I think, and maybe you think differently, common values, common asks, commonality of connecting to the more than human world and asking, what do you want of me, and responding in real time, which I've probably said often enough that most people listening to the podcast can recite it with me. But still, I think that's what we're here for. How do you see us stepping into that, and what does it feel like when we get there? If you can answer that before you have to go and pick up the kids.
Yeah, no, it will be an absolute pleasure, really. And I knew when you invited me to this interview that we would go to these places, and I'm always so grateful to be able to have these conversations kind of opened and
Me too.
offered. Yeah, so
Thank you.
thank you.
It's a pleasure.
um, yeah, yeah. Um, well, there's I'm sure you're uh, yeah, probably sure that you are familiar with Nicholas Breezewood in
Yes.
Wales.
I
Yes.
have sat in ceremony with Nick quite often. Yeah.
Okay.
A long
Okay.
time,
Cool.
very
So
long time ago. Like before you were born, time ago. If I've done the
right. Okay.
arithmetic of your birthday right.
Right. Okay. 1989 boy.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah.
Yep, before you were born,
Um.
I had sat in circle with Nick.
Right. Okay. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, Nick. I mean, Nick Breezewood is like, yeah, very. I have a lot of respect for the integrity of the way he walks his path. Unwavering, really. Um, and so he said, and I love it because I relate to it so much. I'm like, of course, this is it for me as well. Like he was unfortunate to be born into, a society where his ancestral traditions were all but lost, all but lost. Same here, Scotland, right? Celtic druidic traditions, um, they're all but lost. There's very few tiny little crumbs of, pockets of the society that they're still kind of either keeping alive or reviving, and on that note, I will just give a quick shout out to Agav O'Brien. I think that's how I pronounce his surname. He is a man from Argyll and Bute, and his household. The first language of his household is the Argyll and Bute dialect of Gaelic, and he's brought his children up to speak, Gaelic, and yeah, really beautiful, really beautiful. So special shout out to him because he's not just keeping alive, he has fully revived, traditions, and he is a bearer of traditions of these lands, not so far away. He was our first footer as we came here because he wanted to come over and, welcome us to the land. And that to me was a very special moment. So, and I guess that in and of itself is part of what I think it looks like in answer to your question, right? I'll say no more because that exact act, the tradition bearer of Argyll and Bute, was our first footer when we moved into this house,
You need to explain to people not in the UK, or actually not from Scotland, what a first footer is, because I think that's unique to Scotland. So just
Oh, really?
open that one up.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay. And instead of bringing me pieces of coal, he brought me lavender from
nice.
across where he lives, which was beautiful.
So it's the
Such a
first
warm,
it's the
fuzzy
first
feeling.
person to step across the threshold. And traditionally in Scotland, Hogmanay, which is
Yeah.
New Year, is much bigger than Christmas. And the person who is your first foot across the threshold
Yeah.
in the New Year should be a tall, dark, handsome stranger. I was taught when I was young, and they should
Right.
bring a lump of coal. So it's obviously not that ancient of a ceremony because coal's not that old. But presumably before that they brought peat, or they bring something
Yeah.
to keep the fires going.
Right.
So yeah, that. So the first footer for you was when you got to your house. This was your first person arriving, I'm guessing,
E-
to greet you.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. In that context, he was our first footer. He was the first person to step over the threshold of our door here into our home, and he brought us some lavender. Um,
I
beautiful
just,
puppy.
yeah, she's
Wow.
not quite so small anymore, and she's just going to start singing. So I thought I'd just give her a cuddle.
Okay.
Maybe she won't sing. Go on.
Okay. Cool. Um, she's so beautiful. Yeah, and so that it's that, and what Nicholas Breezewood said about him being born into a place where the traditions are all but dead, almost dead. Um, Me too. But what has helped him to reconcile, that capacity to connect with the land which saw him born, was the time that he spent with Mongolian and Tibetan medicine
Yeah,
people, right?
it's his thing. Yeah,
And learning how they do it, in their communities, and bringing that to here, and being able to listen to the voice of the land and listen to the voice of nature on the land that saw him born, right? Um, that is where we're able to revive, bring to life that level of indigenous existence, indigenous consciousness, indigenous vibration. And even if, it's either using other initiatory cultures to like tapping into other initiatory cultures to be able to initiate us into a connection with the land, the trees, the plants, and and then receiving initiatory
yeah,
instruction from
that's where
those, from the land, from the trees, from the plants, in order to move ourselves intentionally, ceremonially, correctly, in right relationship through the seasons of life, or it is bringing the initiatory instructions and knowledge for moving through the seasons of life from another culture. Like the entry point is either connecting with the land, the plants, and the trees to receive their instruction from this land, or connecting with the instruction and the guidance of another living indigenous culture to run ourselves through those initiatory processes that help us to move through the cycles of life in coherence and right relationship, to through that connect with the land, the plants, and the trees, and continue to expand this reception of understanding.
Right.
Does that make
Right.
sense?
It totally makes sense, and it's very
Yeah.
coherent. We had Bill Plotkin on in the autumn, and he has this theory that childhood, adolescence, adulthood, elderhood, each is split into two. The detail probably doesn't matter, but that our culture is locked in early adolescence, and because we lack the adults and the elders to move us through that, and only by either, exactly as you say, finding the adults and the elders that we will trust and that our wounded parts will and can listen to, bring that from other cultures, or enable enough of our culture to grow into adulthood and elderhood, which for him is finding what it is that we're here for. The transition for him between early adolescence and late adolescence is that discovery of who I am, what it is that I need for my sense of meaning and purpose. And then adulthood is living that out into the world and sharing it with other people, which is exactly what you're doing. And then elderhood is reflecting on all of the cycles of that, and in cognitive neuroscience, when we get over 60, our pattern matching finally kind of settles because we've seen enough patterns to match. And then we can begin, I'm sure people can be elders long before they're 60, but there's something about that overview of then being able to usher other adolescents through into adulthood, and that absent that, if we stay as early adolescents, it's the early adolescence that says I need to be big and powerful and demonstrate to the world how big and powerful I am, because actually I'm fundamentally quite insecure because I haven't discovered who I am yet. And so, yeah, that resonates a lot with everything that we've heard before, and also with the richness of your experience of living through that. And it seems to me that however old you are speaking from a position of elderhood within our culture, and you are able to usher other people at least into adulthood, which is what we need. First of all, how does that land? And second, are you seeing with the people that you work with, and you said you get people from all over the white culture, are you seeing them moving into a place of groundedness and stability and the capacity to share within their own circles and spheres the teachings?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, yes, it does land. And um again, images coming to my mind when I listened to you speak, and the image that came to my mind was actually there was a meme that I saw about a certain US president saying hey, we could just take him to Alaska and
Yes,
say
I saw that.
and tell him it's Greenland. And did you see it?
Yes,
And tell him
yes,
it's
we could give him
Greenland.
a ribbon to cut and tell him
We
we've got
could
Greenland, and he
then
wouldn't know any different. Yeah.
and even include a little trophy in the mix, and the
Yes,
job would be
yes.
finished. Give
Yes,
him a little trophy.
give him the Greenland Peace Prize. Tell him you've got
Yeah,
Greenland, and he wouldn't know. Yes, sadly.
yeah, yeah.
How did that arise? Of people being locked in adolescence? I'm not sure he's even made it that far. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the one of the sad truths, is that people locked in childhood and adolescence are ruling our world, are leading our societies. Um, but yeah, so to answer your questions, yes, it absolutely lands. Um, and you know, uh, I do receive the elder. What do we call it? Eldership, elderhood. Um, I receive it with humility, with gratitude and humility, still knowing that I absolutely have a hell of a lot of my own work still to do. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of work still to do, and that's really knowing how much of my own work I still have to do keeps me very, very humble. Um, and even these exchanges that we were having, before we came to this interview, this conversation, the exchanges I was having on WhatsApp with those collaborators, that all of that, it just continues to anchor me in humility, because there is so much that I'm still not capable of, and that I still don't understand, that I still don't know, that I still haven't experienced, and that I still actually can sometimes find myself flailing a little bit in the face of, because I don't know how to react or what to do, right? So whilst I do receive, and it does land, the elder, speaking as an elder in the community, it does land, and I'm grateful and graceful in receipt of that. It is received with the most sincere humility, because of exactly that.
Yeah, no,
um,
and I can see that in you, and that's and if it didn't, I don't think the elderhood. Every elder, genuine elder I've met, has been exactly that, very aware of their own work still to be done, because it is never ending. I think it was Ram Dass who said, if you've done all your work in the world, you know you've done all your work in the world because you're no longer alive. Yeah, if you're alive, there's
right,
still work to do.
right.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So true. And the work is really, it helps to give us life force, and life force is what keeps our soul in our body, and our body functioning and as alive in this world. So,
yes,
and I'm very much alive in
you
these
are.
times. So symbolic of just how much work there is to be done. Just to answer your other question, yeah, do I see others? Yes, I absolutely do. And I'll tell you something. This is, again, I'm blessed. I'm truly blessed. I mean, I feel like one of the most blessed people on earth to have my closest, nearest, and dearest friends, with whom I share so much, like, intimate connection, and ah, yeah, all the juicy human stuff, empathy and compassion and friendship, and they are the richest relationships in my life, and I'm blessed to have them. And I'm also blessed by the fact that they are also kind of at the frontier of this work,
Doing this work. Yeah,
doing this
right,
work, and we can do it together.
right.
They
Yes,
each have their own respective organizations, retreat centers, men's work movements, and whatnot. And here we are collaborating and being in collaborative relationship and working together, and also, you know, um, doing this important work, like triggering each other, and like having feelings of resentment coming up towards each other, and having to work through that collectively,
right.
whilst looking at each other in the eyeballs, and whilst seeking to regulate our nervous systems together, right? All of this beautiful stuff is happening in our life, and I'm so blessed for it. And at the same time, the people who come to us within the context of our, individual organizations, whether that be the men's work organization, or the retreat center organization, or our organization, Native Wisdom Hub, and the work that we do with the indigenous populations, everybody unanimously shares this burning love for witnessing people who have chosen to walk the path, you know, receiving
Right.
our mentorship, our guidance, and for us to kind of look out and see the people who are coming to us over long periods of time, developing and growing,
Yeah.
and ah, that is priceless, and then
It is.
beginning to lead their own circles, and beginning to lead their own, things, their own teachings, beginning to give their own teachings. And their teachings are not necessarily our teachings,
No, no,
that they
they've
may be
evolved.
influenced. Right,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And this is such a beautiful thing. So, bit of a long-winded way to say that, yes, we see this, in our community, and we feel very proud in a non-paternalistic way,
Mm.
you know, um, proud, yeah, and happy and touched.
Yes. To be proud of our students, of the people that we've shared circle with, I think is one of the most amazing things there is. Just to see how people evolve. It's so beautiful. And
Yeah,
maybe that way we get to the 30% or whatever the percentage is of the population. Because they start to lead and it ripples out, and then others start to lead and it ripples out, and it grows all the time, and it's glorious.
Yeah.
We are way over our hour that we normally have. Is there anything else that you feel would be useful or good, or that your spirits incline you to share with our audience now?
Mm. Well, I guess I will give a special mention to my wife, Erika Warkaya, who, have you met Erika?
No, you
No,
came with just the
you haven't met her.
children. No, I
Just the
haven't.
children.
Yeah.
So the mother of my children and my wife now for 17 years. Just, yeah, a special shout out to my wife, Erika, and the work that she is also doing in, you know, keeping her ancestral traditions alive and helping spread her ancestral traditions into the knowledge and consciousness and understanding of people from modern societies. I feel very proud of her, and I feel very proud of our work together. And if it's that, like, yeah, go tune into my wife as well, because she's amazing.
Okay. Yeah, we will do. I'll share all of your links in the show notes so people will be able to find you. And you're in the UK probably for the rest of this year, and then maybe in Peru.
Yeah, at the moment we're like 10 months Loch Lomond in Scotland and 2 months Peru. At the moment, that's kind of roughly the balance we've got, and we're looking to by December 2026 to have that turned on its head and
Oh,
be 10
okay.
months Peru, 2 months Scotland. So
Right. So your kids
um
will be going to school in Peru if they go to school at all.
yes, I think I mean there's lots of community and also land-based kind of education
Right.
movements across South America,
Right.
and so we'll be tapping duly
Right.
into that, and of course using our trips into the jungle and through the communities in the mountains as their school
Oh,
as well.
what a way to learn. I want to be reborn as one of your kids. That would be fantastic. All right. Thank you. I think we're probably at a good place to end. And I have so enjoyed this conversation. It feels so rich and so
Mm.
alive and so full of wisdom. And I am deeply grateful to you for making the time and for being well enough to come. So, Mark
Mm.
John, thank you for coming on to the Accidental Gods podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to anybody and everybody out there who has tuned in and listened and been present with this. I'm immensely, immensely grateful. Yeah, thank you.